Thank you all very much for coming. It's a great pleasure to have with us, of course, people of whom I've known for a very long time, because the family, the Bennsion family, has been one that I've known really for over 15 years, I think, right back to the time when I was first in Cairo and at the Cathedral. And the circumstances of that were framed entirely by the situation in the Sudan, which we will hear very much more about. But it is therefore a very great pleasure to be able to welcome Mrs. Bennsion here, Buyenyo, and also, of course, the three children, of whom Kogo has just graduated from high school at Groton, and I had the honour of being present for the prize day, so that was rather special. But we have also Priscilla and Tege, I think I'm right in saying, is that right? Because I know I find the name little, who's also with us, so it's a very, very happy occasion to welcome them all here. And of course, I know Emmanuel, Father Emmanuel, who assists at the Cathedral in Cairo and has also served, I think, out in St. John's Mahdi, which is a parish where you also still connect. And we'll touch upon that as well, because Mahdi is a centre also of ministry to the current generation of Sudanese refugees. And I have to say, since independence in 1956, the history of Sudan has been very, very troubled in terms of conflict. Even before and after the country split into what is now Sudan and South Sudan. One thinks of the first Sudanese war, which was 55 to 72, and then if you think of the second, from 83 to 2005, and that was really very important because it framed the context in which I think you had first to flee to Egypt. But after that, you had a further war with the war in Darfur from 2003 to 2020, and the South Sudanese civil war after independence, 2000, that's to say the independence of the South, and from 2013 to the present, and now the current Sudanese civil war. And that, of course, has been tragic in terms of its further toll on life and well-being. There are 25 million people now thought to be in danger of starvation, essentially, over whom 14 million are children, all in need of immediate financial and food support, which means that there's a huge number of refugees. 16% of the total population of the country is thought to be displaced as a result of that conflict. All of which frames, therefore, the history of modern Sudan in a way that's rather tragic. And a key part of that has been, unfortunately, the loss of the population who've ended up as refugees in so many cases. And as I mentioned from the start, that's how our connection first was formed. Having come here, and we'll get back, I think, hopefully in your remarks to the story of how that came about and the trials and tribulations of that extraordinary journey from Sudan to Egypt, it is very striking now that the Sudanese first generation, as in the case of Mrs. Bennsion, are now helping the second and further generations. And now you have a continuing ministry, which is how you've been working with the United Nations, I think, in providing for later generations of refugees, the majority of whom at the moment are, of course, Muslim. And I think it's an important point to recognize the interfaith aspect of that witness, and also I think the shared experience has now been suffered by all the various groups. It's very striking, of course, that now Sudan itself is very much a majority Muslim country. That has not stopped the conflicts, tragically. And the South is, of course, a country with, I think, 20 million Anglicans, or 20 million Christians, of whom 2 million are Anglicans, as I think I have the statistics right, roughly. So that is also a very striking fact. But it's not really for me to go on too long. I think it's far better to have you, Mrs. Bennsion, give us an account of how you first, how this great story first began, and we can then explore it in conversation, I think, afterwards.
Hello, my name is Buyenyo Bennsion, and I am here with my kids, as it was mentioned. We live in Cairo, Egypt. And my husband is a reverend in the charge of the Episcopalian Sudanese congregation at St. John's the Baptist in Mahdi, Cairo. Most of our members in the church are refugees from South Sudan and migrants from Sudan and South Sudan also. We came to the US to attend the high school graduation of my son. It was mentioned. He was in Groton School. And we did the graduation last Sunday. I would like to mention here also we are so grateful for the church providing us with a place to stay in our time here in Boston. It's a very nice house. So let me start in the beginning with the causes of the conflict that had plagued our life. In 1980s, in South Sudanese people were facing discrimination in the allocation of resources in Sudan as a whole. The North was receiving better education and infrastructural development like roads and trains, airports, while the North continuously lagged behind. The capital and the political center, the colleges were all in the North. These injustices were rooted in racism, as the North was predominantly Muslims and considered themselves Arab, while the tribal African Christians were in the North. This caused also, in addition to that, by that time President Nimeri decided to make the Sharia law, the Muslim law, is the state law in the Sudan. So this tension culminated in Dr. John Garang and his fellow soldiers starting the revolutionary movement around 1983. At that time, I was a teenage, growing in Malakal, South Sudan. I couldn't finish my education in my own town. We had to take the boats and go to the north to finish our education in boarding schools in the north of Sudan. I finished my high school in 1989. I was awarded a scholarship to continue my studies in Egypt. And I went to Egypt the following fall in 1990s. The conflict was still growing when I left to Egypt. From just a battle being fought in the wilderness, it started to encroach on the towns and cities. This is when people started to leave the South Sudan and head to the capital of Khartoum. But then they were being accused of siding with the rebels, and homes were legally searched by the police, and people were arrested and tortured without evidence. Also, our people in Khartoum were called displaced, even though Khartoum is part of Sudan and we should be the people of Sudan, but then we didn't have our rights to live as a free citizen. So people were fleeing from the north to Egypt. In the mid-90s, the UNHCR started to register refugees and asylum seekers from the Sudanese crisis. Things were going well until 2003, when the number of refugees from Sudan and the asylum seekers increased and overwhelmed the UNHCR. And they were forced to start restricting the requirement to get help. After that, many refugees' cases were rejected because the refugees found it difficult to write cases that fulfilled the requirement to get aid, and were helpless at the interviews at the embassies that were trying to help them. This is when the UNHCR hired some people like us. We were 15. They said, I think it is better to get people from the community of the refugees to help. We were trained to write the cases and to make the interview better, to go with the refugees in the embassies to make the interviews interpreted. We also involved in the IOM interviews, translating the cases. The IOM stands for International Organization of Migration. We did this work for 8 years. When the official peace agreement was signed in South Sudan in 2005, we were transformed from working on the Sudan cases to the Iraqi cases. In 2011, the UNHCR formally closed our help us group. We were called Musaidin in Arabic. That means helpers. It was closed, but we continue to work together independently of the UNHCR to keep helping the refugees. Even though the peace agreement was signed in South Sudan, and South Sudan gained independence in July 2011, the civil war started this time between the President Salva Kiir and the Vice President Riek Machar in 2013, and this was mentioned by Father Alistair. Things did not go well, even though the South gained its independence. But my other side of the story and my life is my marriage. I married Emmanuel on December 18th of December 2003, and it was settled. We settled in Egypt because he couldn't return home when he graduated. Egypt at that time was awarded for many students from South Sudan. So Emmanuel was a student there in Egypt. When he finished in, I think in 1995, by that time, the war was so bad in South Sudan, and the security people back there were looking for the young graduates and the people who are well educated, and this was a threat for him. So there was people who advised them to stay in Egypt until the war ended. We got married in Khartoum, but we decided to settle in Egypt because he already decided to stay there. So I moved to Egypt in that time. We got our children, and now these days we establish ourselves in Egypt and have served our community for more than 20 years. Again, war has stuck in Sudan. This time the war is in the north between the Rapid Supported Forces, RSF, and the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF. The people who originally oppressed us were now fleeing from their homes. Instead of turning our noses off them for getting what they deserve, we opened our doors to them. They are mainly Muslims, refugees. We set up a welcoming fellowship where every Friday during winter we met medida, which is like a porridge, a meal both cultures have in common that warms the body. We set up initiatives to donate bunches of winter clothes and blankets. Even though most of the congregation work as cleaners and do not make a lot of money, we were able to pool enough to donate enough food for 40 families in the first month. We will continue to provide whatever we can because that is what Christ has told us to do. Because we know the pain of being forced to leave your belongings, family, and the entire life behind. One of the ladies who come to our church witnesses because those people are Muslims, they go from church to church seeking for help. But she mentioned one sentence that I don't forget. She said, though I go to many churches, but here in the St. John, you are the only people who give us a time to listen to. This is what Jesus would have done. We do it even though before they were our enemies and they caused us troubles. And because of the north, we end up living in Egypt. But because of our life in Egypt as refugees, we are now able to help them. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, which of course carries so much, or covers so much, of the initial territory, all the way back to when you first really had to make that move. And just going back to that, what was the trigger that made you think of you had to move, you couldn't stay on? And could you tell us a little bit about the actual journey, how you got such an enormous distance as it is from where you were way down in the south all the way up to Cairo?
So we are in Malakal town, and in the late 83 and 84, that's when the conflict reached to the town. And of course the government is trying to help as much as it can. The people who moved first was the student. We were forced to leave. I left my family behind, and I have to go to boarding school. This is the beginning. And then the boarding schools are in the north where it is safe, because the conflict, always the war happened in South Sudan. So the more we move towards the north, the more it is safety. After I was in the boarding school for 3 years, I did not go back. My family followed me because also it was too dangerous for the rest of the people. And I want to mention also that my father was a Presbyterian pastor, and he was the last people to move. He was like, didn't want to move, even the war was taking place, but then there was no way. It is getting too dangerous. So we moved to Khartoum. By that time, there was a program between Egypt and Sudan that the students can get a scholarship. And this was the only way to find a better place. The scholarship is full. We get the tuition free, and we get the allowances, and we get the place. And Egypt was more likely like Khartoum. They speak Arabic, so we feel a little bit at home. But nobody had no idea that this is the end of it. We were hoping that the war may end and we go back, and then we can get our jobs like normal people.
And you were studying at the university at Cairo?
At the university in Cairo, yeah. I studied commerce, economic.
Ah, right, yes.
It happened that Emmanuel was in the same university, my husband. But it was later on that we knew each other.
Did he first study another subject, or did he immediately study theology?
He was in this university studying education. So when he finished, it was that time when people were getting ready to go back. Then there was this war that targeting the graduates and the educated people. So
for you, for either, and indeed both of you, to return would have been very dangerous at that time, yes, because the professional classes were being attacked in particular.
Yeah. His family especially was in the south. My family was in the north, in Khartoum. I could go back to Khartoum. He couldn't go back to the south. So many students were advised not to come. Even in Khartoum, they shouldn't come. It was too dangerous, but they remained there. When he remained there, this is where he was looking for another education, and he studied the theological in the seminary.
Yes, and that of course allowed him then to be ordained. Was his family Anglican? It was your family that was Presbyterian. I see, yes. And then you had to make a completely fresh start when you became refugees in Egypt. I think there's often an ambivalence about Egypt because in one sense Egypt clearly has done a lot. It's hosted an enormous number of refugees. I recall the figure of 1 million being mentioned when I was in Cairo right back then, from Sudan alone. On the other hand, actual access to what you need can be very difficult. So can you perhaps fill out for us a little bit your life as a refugee and the challenges that that posed?
Egypt is not like the other countries that are hosting refugees, where the refugees are put in a place where they call it camp or a settlement for refugees, especially where they get aid from the other organization. In Egypt, the refugees, they are within the citizen. You have to get the rent. There is no any access of aid. You have to find job so that you can live your life, and this is the most difficult challenge that faces the refugees. Though the UNHCR is there, but the number of refugees, not only from Sudan, but from other countries like Eritrea, like Syria, like Iraq, make it very difficult for the UNHCR to give a good help. But then the challenge of getting the job was very difficult. The only job that we can find is cleaning, and the payment is so little. With the increasing number of refugees and the students who didn't go back, they thought of making like learning centers, like an educational center for the children. This is where sometimes people get a teaching job. And this center, sometimes the UNHCR get access to help, maybe with the rent of the center or paying food for the children.
Since you've touched on education, it is worth dwelling on a little bit, because again, the Egyptian state in principle is committed to offering education to all the refugees. In practice, my impression is that it can be much harder actually to get the education.
It is true. The law in Egypt has welcomed all the refugees to access the public education in Egypt, but we found it really difficult. The issue of racism is there, and also the language. This is the two main problem, and it is very difficult. We found it, the racism is so high among the children, and sometimes the teachers don't stand and just the problems.
And the language you touched on, there being a challenge that the Arabic is different, or are you thinking more of the Dinka versus Arabic as well?
Arabic is different, and more of the Southerners, they more like prefer English education. And in Egypt, the schools that provides English as a mean of education are the private schools, and they are very expensive.
Yes, and your dedication to making sure that your children did get an education has certainly been very important to their lives subsequently.
Yeah, so this is why now the communities created these learning centers, which are very good. They take the curriculum from South Sudan, and they give education to the children.
Yes, that seems to be an important ministry which very much requires a lot of support, and outsiders are not perhaps as familiar with that. But I have certainly retained links myself to one such institution, which we both know about, and that's an important ministry to encourage others to support, clearly. So then we have, speaking of that, the story of Kogo, making it all the way over here to high school. Can we story, because that seems an interesting one itself.
Yeah, Kogo is my firstborn, and I would say he was born like that, intelligent. he was smart from the beginning, to tell the truth. So one of my friends, she's teaching in the AUC. She noticed how this boy is smart, and she always would say to me, let him get education well, because he is smart. So the friend helped us. As Kogo was growing, he was very good in his education, and with the help of my friend, he was able to apply the US boarding schools and make the interview with Groton, and they like how he was responding to the question and explaining himself very well, and then they got him with full ride. We are so grateful. I am really so grateful. And now he's lucky to find a university here also.
Yes, and that's just come through in recent days as we've been charting quite closely. So that's a further chapter we can look forward to hearing about in the future. Yeah. Coming back to the refugee crisis, it would be interesting to hear your reflections on Sudan and the major tensions, which are both north and south, but also, sadly, religious, because you have such divisions. Could we perhaps look at that both in terms of the original Sudan? So going back to when you were one country, how did you experience that religious dimension? You referred to a lot of discrimination, the self-identification of the north with being Arab, which is really quite striking, and of course the tension then with the Christian south. Britain has had a connection in that regard, going right the way back to the 19th century, which is of course a time when that particular aspect led to forced conversions. We had a major period for Sudan when forced conversions in the north were made, so the Christian population, closely allied as it was with the Coptic Church, was basically forced to become Muslim, and I'm sure that's lingered on in its effects. So I just wondered if you might think about that first period when you first fled, because that was the original Sudan as it was. How was the experience of living in that country, then very much as a minority as Christians?
It was always like that. Since the independence, there is a difference between the north and the south. Even with the background of the origin of people, we are different. As you mentioned, the British colonization also make the wide and different, because South Sudan was called a closed area by that time. And when the missionaries came to Sudan, they were allowed to go to south and not very much in the north. This is the religious differences. And when I was growing up, it was very clear to me, I am not like the north. I am South Sudanese, and I am Christian, and they are Arab, and they are Muslim. Right from the education, when the people interact in the schools, it was very obvious. But then, with the political, at the political level, we could see that the people who are this Arab, they are the one in power all the time. And things in the north, in Khartoum, in the northern part of Sudan, are going on well. But in the south, you could see there is no any development happening.
So the economic divide became ever deeper.
Yes, and also as I grow up and I hear from the people who are talking about the injustice, I could see that the resources are in south, but they are taken from the south and being used for the development of North Sudan.
Yes, so the financial rewards went to the north, even though the resources were taken from the south. Thinking about the current conflict, which is a very different one, well, actually, we should go to the intervening period, really. If we go back to the point at which then north and south divide, the south also had tensions then as well. So how would you reflect on the tensions which broke out so much in the south after the independence?
Well, I think on my personal view is maybe they were not really ready very much to see themselves as one. The conflict mainly was between the president Riek Machar and his vice, the president Salva Kiir and his vice Riek Machar. Salva Kiir is from a different tribalism group, and Riek Machar is from another group. And the conflict started like that. When I see it, people were not ready to unite as one. And maybe the power also. Maybe Riek Machar wanted more powers, while Salva Kiir was the president, the officially president. In South Sudan, the tribalism aspect is very strong. And whenever there is a conflict or there is a division, people tend to stand by tribes. Mm-hmm.
Looking at the conflict that has arisen now in the north, that seems a very different kind of conflict. Here you've got this superficially cohesive country now experiencing a profound disruption as well. How would you reflect on that?
Well, this is very unfortunate because there was so many political problems in the north. Always, when there is tension in the political aspect, they solve it with a coup d'etat. There was no war. I haven't heard about the civil war in Khartoum. But there was, like, this president is not, they will make a revolution or they will make a coup, will arrest some of the officers, and that is all. But I really was sad when the conflict started and the guns started shooting inside the capital city of Sudan. And of course, the problem goes back to al-Bashir, the previous president who brought this group of the soldiers from Western Sudan and armed them, and now they are asking for power, and the war began. People in Khartoum, they are not really aware of what to do when the war starts. One of them, the lady told me, we were watching as the military start to, occupy the streets, and we were so surprised when they start shooting at us. I told her, if it was in the south, we will knew that this is going to be a war and we will flee away. So there was no people who are ready to.
Which deepened, of course, the suffering.
Yeah.
Coming back to your context in Cairo now and that continuing ministry after the first wave of mainly Christian Sudanese from the south, the ending of the UNHCR official role, you've continued to work through the parish structure and at St. John's Mahdi, providing that. Can you just dwell a little bit again on that story? Because that witness is an important, and indeed that ministry is clearly very important.
So when the UNHCR stopped the assistance for the refugees from South Sudan, but then it was started all over again after the 2013, and there was an incident in 2016 also inside the capital city of Juba. So people kept coming, but then we were like, we settled our life in Egypt, and the people who were young, they grow up and they married and they have children now. Those children, they don't know about the war. They were born in Egypt and they are growing there, like Kogo, and they don't know about the war, but they know that they are living in Egypt peacefully. So this community they know how to live their life among the Egyptians. They know how to find jobs, they know how to get education, even it is not like the best thing. And so when this war came, the Sudanese, they started to reach. We were like, oh, we know what to do. You see, and I call it like former refugees reached out to a refugee. We know the suffering, and we know Egypt very well. We know how to help them to find, things around Egypt, and we know how to help them with the suffering that they face and the challenges that they are going to face in Cairo. So we couldn't keep quiet. We couldn't leave them like that and say, oh, you deserve that, because those Muslims were the one who were oppressing us, the Southerners, before. But they deserve help. And if Jesus Christ was there in Mahdi in Egypt, he wouldn't let them suffer. With this simple thing in our hands, we welcome them in our church. We say it every Friday. The first Friday in the month, they would come. By that time, it was winter and it was very, very, very cold. And we know in Sudan, we don't have warm clothes because the winter is not that bad. So we know that these people, they don't have warm clothes for winter. So we gathered our whatever clothes and we gave them. And this medida, I like it very much. When we gather like this and we have this, like the refreshment you have here, but it is very special that this one we used to do it even in Sudan, back then when Sudan was one country.
And it is made of?
Of sorghum flour, yeah, with water and then sugar. Sometimes we add many things. We can add peanut butter on it. We can add like milk or yogurt. Yeah.
This makes them feel very welcome and at home.
Very welcome. And also, we know that the refugee come with heavy loaded heart because the journey is not easy. They come through the border of Sudan and Egypt. And that time, they were not allowed to come legally. So they come in a way, they find their way to come to get to Cairo. And it involved working like 8 hours by foot in the desert in the night. You don't know where to put your foot. And people come very tired, exhausted. And sometimes also there are stories like, oh, the car had accident and my son died there. One lady said, I was holding my baby and when the car like pushing like this, it fall down. I cried so that they can stop. There's no way to stop because once the journey started, they want to run with the car to enter the border of Egypt without stopping. So many stories like that. They need somebody to hear them when they are telling the story. We don't know about the counseling, process, but hearing them is enough to give them release.
Very impressive witness, I'm sure, and I know that a lot of us will have questions, so it might be an idea to open things up a little. I think it might also be helpful, would you like a glass of water or something? I can't disconnect myself from all the microphones. We could take 2 glasses of water. Yes. Dr. Denslow.
I have a question, thank you. I'm a parishioner here at the Church of the Advent.
Thank you.
For such a heartwarming story, overcoming all these challenges, and also just the wonderful grace that we have to forgive these people and open up their homes and hearts and economics. I apologize for being late. I was curious what percentage in Sudan, and if you break down north and south, is Christian. You may have already mentioned that, but I was curious about the Muslim versus Christian.
The religious makeup of the 2 different countries. Thank you so much.
Shukran. So, and now Sudan is split it in two countries, mainly Sudan which is the north part of old Sudan, they are Muslim. But there is a minority of Christian, which are Sudanese, not South Sudan, are like converted people or something like that. They are there. And the Nuba mountain in the west, they are considered Sudanese, and they are Christian. But I cannot tell you the percentages. They are minority. In South Sudan, most of the South Sudanese are Christian. And many denominations, we have Catholic and Anglican and Presbyterian and other small group of Christian denomination. There are also a number of Muslims who are South Sudanese. Yeah. And we have also people who have not heard about Christian or Islam.
I was going to ask you about that because quite a significant percentage of the population still has traditional beliefs. Yes. That's persisted amazingly all the way through. It's both true in the north and in the south. Interesting. Yes. Would you ever think of going back to your original homeland in the south of Sudan now?
It will remain a dream that we hope one day it will come true. South Sudan is now unpredictable. We cannot, conflict can happen anytime. And that's why it is not, for us, it is not safe. But still people are living there, and they are living like that. Anytime, anything can happen. Yeah. But for Sudan, there is still war happening now. And there is no any sign, I don't hear about any negotiation or those part of the warring party coming together, even though the countries, many countries are urging them to sit for the negotiation.
Chronic instability is a problem in the south, and then of course there is this new problem in the north. Not that you would be going back to the north anyway, you would be going to the south.
How many non-governmental organizations from other countries are active?
In South?
If any.
How many NGOs are there that are active in the south?
In the south, there are so many. Yeah.
Let's look at it from another angle. Would you say the majority of those agencies that are effective are governmental, or are they NGOs?
NGOs.
That
Yeah.
includes missionaries.
There are more NGOs like United Nations NGOs, more, but there are also missionaries. Yeah.
And in the south, to ask a slightly more technical question, is a missionary organization overtly missionary allowed? And secondly, is there any concern about externally funded non-governmental organizations? I ask that because it is a real challenge in Egypt. The government is very concerned about overseas organizations operating in Egypt, so they're very cautious about that. Is it the same in the south?
No, the Egyptian, because there is the issue of Islam, and the Christianity is not free in Egypt. Christians are not just free. You cannot stand on the street and preach. That's why also the church cannot just get funds from outside. It is restricted because of the issue of the government. But in South Sudan, they welcome because they know they are Christian, and any assistant or any organization which is wanting to do some work, Christian or development work or any kind of assistance, they are welcome in South Sudan.
Are there American Peace Corps volunteers?
Does the American Peace Corps have a presence?
I think they are in the south. Yeah, they call it. There is a name. USAID, something like that. Yeah.
Other questions?
Just curious about, you've welcomed in your former oppressors, and how, is there any tension in Egypt between those two groups? Even though you offered them help, is there tension still?
Is there continuing tension?
I don't think so. They have realized, I think they come to their sense, and they know that what happened in the past was not good or was a wrong thing, and their eyes are opened now, because they keep saying it was not good what we did in the past, or what happened to you. Some people, they speak like that. But in Egypt, we are all Sudanese. Even if we are from the north or from the south, we have the same, similar culture. And Egypt is not our country. It's not the South Sudanese country, it's not the Sudanese country. So this is the common thing between us.
What about the language divide between the Dinka speaking and Arabic speaking? Does that have some impact, do you think, on your community?
No. Even being, Dinka is the majority of the tribe, which is the majority in South Sudan. But for example, I am not from Dinka. Emmanuel is not from Dinka. The thing that unites us is Arabic. Yeah, we speak with the Dinka and with other tribes with Arabic. And this Arabic is coming from the background that we were in Sudan. As one country, and Sudan, the main language was Arabic. So even though in South Sudan now they announced that the main language is English, but it will take time, because for me, I used to speak Arabic, but for them, they are coming. The next generation, will speak English.
Any other questions? No? Otherwise, since we have the video with us, I think I might just ask Kogo, would you be happy to make a few remarks since about your experience of coming to America? We just need to move the microphone, if that's agreeable. Well, Kogo, yes, we're delighted to have you with us, and it's been a great pleasure knowing of the journey, because I remember hearing about it at the very beginning, visiting you once after you came to America to go to Groton, and now we've just had the pleasure of your graduation. Or as they prefer to call it in the English manner, and I have to say, I would suggest more elegantly, prize day. What is very striking to anyone thinking about that story is here you are living your life in Egypt as a refugee, then you come all the way over here. That is an enormous set of transitions, not just one, you're a Sudanese person living in Egypt, and then coming to America and being in an American high school. What were your thoughts, or are your thoughts, about all those transitions? Did it not seem quite a change when you came to America?
I feel like, for me, throughout this entire journey, it was less striking were the changes, but a lot more striking were like the things that remained consistent. I remember like way early in my education, I actually used to go to a school called Dela Valley, which was headmastered by a Turkish person, and it was like under the Turkish, which was obviously a surprise. And this was in Cairo, in Mahdi, and I've like transitioned through I think like 4 schools now, and with a lot of that kind of movement, including like my father changing from going to the Cathedral, like working there at like All Saints and going to St. John's, and all the moves that happened. A lot that stayed the same was one, like the community around my parents. Like on Sundays we'd always go to like St. John's, which like became the Sudanese congregation that my dad leads, and just being able to listen to, of course I was a young child at the time, but listen to some of the stories of like the places they talked to. I remember like sometimes when my mother would speak about like South Sudan or her times as a kid, or when my dad would on occasion also speak about his past days. It kind of led me to start thinking about that as well. And when I was like, thank God, got the opportunity to come here to study in the States, you know, leaving, of course, with completely different circumstances than like my parents, but also having to like leave my family behind and come at a boarding school here in the States where I didn't really know anybody yet, and I was in a whole new place, and like thankfully my sister also came at the same time, but she was all the way in Virginia, which is a while away from here. But I think change has been kind of a constant, funnily enough, in my entire journey up to this point.
It is striking that because essentially of visa challenges, you were not able to go back to visit your family at all during the whole time of your being here at school. That strikes me as quite a wrench.
Yeah, you know, there are a couple horror stories of students who like took terms abroad or wanted to visit back home and weren't able to return because their visas are expired and they had some complications with their I-20s or F1 status, and they weren't able to continue their educations here. And that was one of the main things my mother was telling me over, like whenever breaks come or wherever I started raising the idea of going back home over, sometimes be like, hey, we've heard about people who weren't able to go back, so I think it's best for you to finish everything first and then we'll start talking about coming back home. So like all my Christmases and summer breaks were spent in like Arizona. Thanksgivings were in New Hampshire, and you know, some of the long weekends I spent in like Boston with friends at Cape Cod or things like that. And I never really was able to go back to Egypt.
Though hopefully we will one day.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. And your school, of course, has an historic link to the Episcopal Church, as Anglicans are known here, being very much founded by Endicott Peabody, who's very, very much an Episcopalian of note. And that was therefore an aspect of continuity, going to an Episcopal school, although I think the Episcopal identity perhaps isn't quite as strong as it was in the time of Endicott Peabody.
Not as strong as then, but we still find ways to keep that kind of tradition going. I was able to thankfully be a chapel prefect this year, and so we were like have our services on Sundays, and we set up like the lessons and carols every year and open that up for like the Groton community and for parents and for like the student body, and we have like celebrate Easter and all these other like traditions that thankfully have still been kept going. We still have chapels 4 times a week, even though they're less like religious than they were back then, but we still sing hymns and things like that. So there's a lot of that was one of the kind of criteria for kind of coming to the States. I remember my mom talking with Brooke, was having some sign of continuity, and they really wanted me to go to a Christian school as well, which is, you know, fit right well with Groton, and you know, being able to have that piece of continuity that we were talking about, like the things that kind of stay constant, Christianity, and being able to go to church every Sunday while having all this change around me as well, and like a whole new environment of like the US and Massachusetts and boarding school was really helped me kind of get through all of that.
Well, we look forward to your being able to visit us in Boston, as your new university, I think, is actually not going to be that far away at Lowell. So, yeah, so we'll look forward to that continuity. I don't know whether your sister would like to say anything, and does anyone have any questions?
I was curious what you're planning to study at university. I know.
My intended major right now is engineering physics with a concentration in mechanical engineering at UMass Lowell. So not that far from here, still staying within state, and we'll see where that kind of leads me.
Other questions? Yes, Deacon Moses, I should say.
So have you been accepted in college already?
Yeah. I'm planning to go this fall.
Is it in Massachusetts?
Yeah, UMass Lowell. Yeah.
Priscilla, would you want to say anything? You don't have to. Well, in that case, we'll spare you. So in that case, it really does fall to me to express our gratitude, both to Kogo and your mother. So thank you all. Really most grateful to you for coming.